Everybody, welcome at iMAL for this Dorkbot special on sculpting sound and spaces. This is a bit sad, but we have an announcement to make, is that two of our speakers tonight are not coming because they are sick. So, unfortunately, Duncan Speakman and Arnoud Jacobs are not going to make it. So the good news is that you're going to be free a bit earlier to have a drink with your friends. The bad news is that, of course, you're not going to be able to listen what they have to say about the project. But we intend to re-invite them in April. So, of course, we'll keep you updated on that. So we are very sorry, but, well, it's cold time, it's winter, this kind of things happen. But nevertheless, we have here a wonderful project, the Kinetic Pavillon, which is just there. It's a project by Elise van den Elsacker and Yannick Bontinckx. They are both students of St. Lucas Architecture. I think it was in Ghent when they make it, but no, you are both in Brussels, or in Ghent and in Brussels, yeah, because, well, St. Lucas Architecture is now both in, well, it was already, but well, anyway, it's another story. So, yeah, this project is also going to be in a showcase exhibition here at iMAL till the 10th of February. So, it means that you still have 3 or 4 more weeks to bring some friends to try it out and see it again. And I will let them speak about the project. So, it's up to you. They will take more time, I think, to talk about the project because it's a very complex project as well. There are many things to say and to show you, so and feel free to interrupt if you have any question, of course.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and actually I'd like to start by expressing my gratitude. The micro. So, thank you for inviting us for the presentation and also give us the opportunity to showcase the pavilion. But most of all, I would like to thank you for organizing all these interesting workshops, because without you, I would maybe never have known how to use processing and Arduino and Kinetic and all the other interactive stuff. So I really appreciate what you are doing, so thank you. And then for the presentation, we will alternate between explaining the concepts and then showing how the pavilion is working. We started the project about 1 year ago for a school assignment at St. Lucas School of Architecture, because we are both master students there. And everything was set up in about 3 months. From scratch, so we had very little knowledge about the hardware and software we would use, but because of the fact that we used open source hardware and software, we managed to make everything in a very short period. And our ambition was to develop a pavilion which spatial configuration could respond to changing weather conditions, people flows, human communication and movements. And yeah, actually, like any other organism, our pavilion can change when the parameters also changes. So the scale model of the pavilion was set up as a first step. It's our first prototype in testing this hardware and software, and also to try out different modes of interaction, which we will show later on. And so we use these digital fabrication techniques, and this gave us the possibility to extend the toolbox of architectural design. We developed, so the development of this kind of interactive architecture could also be seen as a kind of response to the question for more programmable, dynamic, flexible, and adaptable environmental factors of this digital age. And so it's well known that interactivity has already found its way in a lot of aspects of public and private domain. So in this context, the emergence of interactivity in architecture also manifests itself as an unstoppable evolution in architecture. Because now architecture is often seen as something absolute when the architects are defining every space very precisely. But our project shows that it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, and coming up with these new spatial features also encourage us to link it to an optimal user participation. So we believe that architecture will evolve from a static entity to a dynamic and flexible, emergent and alive environment. It will transform itself into a tool to express information in a dynamic way in which the architects will just define the parameters. And so the first parameter we will demonstrate is based on human movements with the iPad. And I think Yannick will explain this part.
Okay, so for the first sketch we wrote in the development of the pavilion was we wanted to mimic the fact that you're walking down the pavilion, but due to budget restraints, we couldn't build the whole thing on a scale of 1:1, so we had to make a scale model, and we couldn't implement motion sensors in the model itself, so we used an iPad to mimic the movement of a person throughout the pavilion. Perhaps I will demonstrate it like this. I hope everybody can see the screen of the iPad. This is basically the ground floor of the pavilion, and you basically move your finger on the screen, and it transpons XY coordinates of the iPad through touch OSC to our Grasshopper script, and then we translate that coordinate to the pavilion. So when you move throughout the pavilion, there's this kind of cocoon forming around you, and the whole space around you encloses, and you have a really nice experience, I think, in the pavilion. Perhaps a more technical thing, we worked in Rhino. Rhino is a program basically designed for engineering and architectural 3D modeling, and we used Grasshopper. This is Grasshopper. It's a parametric design plugin for Rhino, and basically it creates a shift from a linear workflow in architecture to a non-linear one. So in a later design process, you can make alterations that completely change your design. So in Grasshopper itself, we used several other components. For instance, the component Firefly, which is designed by Andrew Payne and Jason Johnson, I think. Yeah, they designed Firefly, and Firefly is basically the communication between the software we wrote in Grasshopper and the hardware of the pavilion itself. We used two Arduino microcontrollers to drive the servo engines in the pavilion itself. And then for the iPad part, We use Touch OSC, which uses the UDP protocol to transmit the coordinates we input on the iPad through the Wi-Fi network over to my laptop, and then Grasshopper controls the pavilion. Perhaps for the next sketch we want to show you is the Kinect, Microsoft Kinect, and I think Elise will explain you a bit more.
So you could also have this camera technology. Also opens the possibility of having people's body movement reflected in the flexible shape of the pavilion. And so the roof of the pavilion reacts as an interactive surface, adjusting itself in real time. So for instance, the body movement of a crowd might have a direct and clearly visible impact on the surroundings. So,
as Elise is showing you now, the Kinect recognizes one person, and basically she controls with her body movement the shape of the pavilion.
The next transformation that we will show is based on weather conditions. So the structures react differently in warm and in cold regions. So in cold regions, the surface of the pavilion will orient itself towards the sun in order to maximize the energy efficiency. So by letting the the building will become more voluminous in those places where it is shady, and then in the warm regions, the pavilion will have an aerodynamic shape, allowing the wind to ventilate the space underneath the roof. And yeah,
I will explain the sketch. This is the whole sketch in Grasshopper, and the first thing we designed was we wanted the pavilion to be adaptable in different locations and different sceneries. So imagine this collection of building blocks as an entity. This could be in Brussels, this can easily be somewhere else. And you can control the height of these buildings. Basically, you can put a whole mesh, a 3D model of an existing city in there, but for simplicity's sake, we used a collection of different blocks now. After this, we will search for a software that's possible of analyzing weather data, and we came up with Ecotect. It's a program by Autodesk, the manufacturer of AutoCAD and other popular CAD software. And it's this program. And basically what it does, it takes mean values of weather data throughout years. It has a huge database. And we use that database to project data on top of the pavilion. So I will export my mesh. And so the yellow area is where the sunlight hits the pavilion, and because we imagined the pavilion with fabric inside of the roof structure, when it opens up, you can allow more sunlight to pass through those areas that are now higher. And in the more dark areas, where there's more shade, the pavilion drops down to eliminate those shady areas. And we can change all kinds of parameters. So now it's this based upon mean values of the 22nd of June. But if it changes to, let's say, September, and wait a bit to process, the pavilion changes. And so each day, each hour, the pavilion can change towards mean values. We also try to implement some live weather data feeds, but these feeds are in a pay. You have to pay each month to get data from them, and they became a bit expensive because this is a student project, and we have budget restraints. The next one.
So we also imagined to have people emotion reflected in the shape of the pavilion, and this is possible with this brain computer interface technology. A couple of months ago, I think, there was a workshop at iMAL, and there I tested how it could work, what would be the reaction on a pavilion. I tested it with another pavilion, but actually the principle of movement is the same. So yeah, you can make it faster. Yeah. So when you're focusing on push, the pavilion will open its shape or react very more energetically. And then when you get neutral again, the pavilion will close and make a more smooth movements. And this could be interesting when you're organizing events, because you can then have the flexible and dynamic. The pavilion could react as a flexible and dynamic organism, and it will be capable of understanding the wants of people within the pavilion. The last transformation is based on music and sound. It was a project elaborated by Esther. He's a third-year student at St. Lucas, very talented. And because we wanted the pavilion to be open source, he made his plugin on it, and I think I will let him explain his work.
Yeah. First of all, I was very interested in the pavilion, and I wanted to make my own sketch, and I found there was something missing, and the interaction with voice and sound, because we all communicate with sound and voices, so it's something that I missed. So I made my own sketch and my own mini pavilion based on the pavilion of Elise and Yannick. So what this mini pavilion does is it's change in real time voices in a surface that is adaptable. The high tones, high voice tones are mapped here. Lower tones are mapped here, and heavy bass tones are mapped here. So all frequencies are mapped in this surface. So when I'm talking in real time, it reacts in real time on my when I speak. Moeten wij iets harder?
If you make a lot of noise, the pavilion will react to the noise patterns we use. Of course, the louder I'm speaking, the lesser you can understand me. So it's receptive on environmental sounds. And okay. Yeah, this will be better. Yeah, we'd like to thank Esther for his contribution. I think it's a really nice addition to our pavilion, and the interaction is very direct and very immediate, and nice work.
So the very last sketch we will show is one made by Corneel Kannerts. He's our teacher, and he made a processing sketch. So it's a sine wave in two direction, and it's in a loop actually. So there is no interaction.
Yeah, that's it for now. We did a lot of work in 3 short months. Like Elise said, when we started, we didn't know anything about Arduino, or even our Grasshopper knowledge was not that, yeah, you know. And we learned a lot, and right now it's in a scale model stage, but we want to really make the step from a scale model to a size 1:1, to a real-life scale. And we're looking for sponsors at the moment, and we think there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of places and spaces in the urban environment where this kind of concept, and I call it a concept, not an architecture, where this concept can be implemented. For instance, a few moments ago we discussed with someone perhaps the possibility of using these technologies in subway systems to give a more vibrant and a more alive feeling inside of subway systems. It can be used in public spaces, and like, we don't want this architecture everywhere in the urban environment. There is room for more static architecture, and there is room for more dynamic and more alive architecture with direct contact with the user of the architecture. And I think for the ending words, we really like to thank our parents, because, like we said, we were on a very short budget. So thank you for supporting us, making this happen, and thank you for listening to our project. And if there are any questions, we will be very glad to answer them.
First, I'd like to congratulate you for your project. I think it's very interesting. But I have a question. Which will be the size of the mechanical parts if you do it in a 1:1 scale? That's Let's sing. Just.
First of all, that's part of the fun in redesigning this project. It's on our shortlist, and we have some contacts already with Siemens, the manufacturer, and right now the mechanical parts are like underneath the surface of the pavilion, and we are redesigning them into the nodes on top of the roof itself, so it will move according on the top shape of the roof instead of now being with The main reason we used this servo system is because Firefly, the plugin we used to control the servos, only supported these servo systems, and it was in our budget to use this. But it's the concept and the idea is transposable to bigger electronical components like pistons. I don't know the word in English, but that you can use to control the top surface. So there's still room for designing, and I think that's part of the fun we're going to have when we are realizing it in scale 1.1, to redesign the top nodes and to make the structure move like from top on. So I hope this answers your question. Anyone else with a question or remark?
Yeah, for the electronic part, actually, because now you're working with Arduino, so it works very fine for some this kind of scale model. But then, how do you implement the electronic, and how do you keep it open source? Because it's also, I think, the goal of your project. Do you think if it becomes like a scale 1.1 project, like a real architecture, I would say, do you keep this project open source and invite people to collaborate with it? I mean, that's two questions, but.
Yeah, we would like to keep it open source, but probably we won't use Arduino for a 1.1 scale because it's not a good device for a big scale.
There are other options to reconfigure the electronic parts, because like you see now, the electronics is an old PSU unit. I dragged out an old computer that I modded into a power source, and the Arduinos are the microcontrollers, but everything is programmable on a bigger scale, so you can use PCBs that are already in schematics designed, and you can still use open source to, it's just a communication to the pavilion that we need to redesign, but I don't think it's a block or something. We can redesign it.
To the voice aspect, the small one, do you see some application of seeing the voice that is translated in the movement of some application? Because for that one, it's clear that it may have some applications, but for the voice transfer to movement, I don't see what could be an application.
Actually, you could have, I will let him answer also. You could have the people and the surrounding sounds translated in the pavilion. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a voice. It can also be the wind or the cars passing by. For example, a concert, when people are playing music in this concert hall and dancing at the same time. This could have a reaction on the roof surface.
It can be an extra part of a visual, a moving visual, a kinetic visual that is beat triggered, so it can detect a climax. It can, when the music is quiet, the pavilion can be very small, and when the climax comes, it builds up and it grows, and then to make a more intense experience. You can also work with different microphones that when people are talking, they can manipulate the pavilion with their voice, shouting against each other, and so adapting the pavilion.
I've seen you showed some sketches with some interaction, like positioning of persons, and I'm asking myself, if you look at interaction design in a multi-user environment, like a square is, or architecture is in really multi-user, and then how do you think, how would you approach this, once you have several users using this space, or once you have, for instance, conflicting values between, for instance, the sun position and users moving? And
right now, all the sketches are based upon one user input, but you can calculate mean values of different actors. Like for the iPad sketch, for instance, I've written a second one where you can use 2 fingers, and then there is a mean value corresponding to where the 2 people are. The pavilion is calculated over a mean value, so it uses the 2 XY coordinates of the persons, and then it calculates the mean values. Like, you understand, like the mean, and so if a lot of users use it, it basically always comes down to calculating means of values.
I think personally there's really something, Yeah, I asked myself the same question, with these conflicting values, and I maybe there's something more than finding means. This is really something. Maybe can you keep an aesthetic? Can you keep this a personal experience even with all these? Imagine a square with hundreds of people. Will your pavilion just be up, or will there something, completely up because this is the mean of all the means of these 100 people, or will something more interesting emerge from this situation?
That depends also on the way you program the script of what the pavilion does, because you can't have all the sketches at the same time, I think. You can't have and sound, or it's possible to have all of them at the same time, but then you really have conflicting values, and you don't see the intention then of what the pavilion is trying to be and trying to suppose. So I think it should change on certain days or certain time frames. You can have one sketch running, and like, for instance, on one day or when it's a party taking place, it can be more the sound sketch that's alive in the pavilion and really dancing on the music vibes or something. And on other days it can be the people movement. Some days the ecotech sketch. So I don't think it's a problem that you can solve the problem with the conflicting values by not having all of them crammed up in the same program.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity. There's like a new era or a new way thing in interaction design, in architectural interaction design, that will kind of try to communicate, find new ways of communicating what is happening there with this interaction. Is it a brain hooked up, or is it, how do you communicate these things and how you make it meaningful? It's just a new, things we as artists and architects will need to explore, I think, in the future.
I think I have a lot of things to say, but and I try to find how to best formulate it. But I think that you made a very beautiful kinetic sculpture. And then you come with a discourse of architecture. And I think then it becomes completely disappointing. And I think there's a huge, huge break in between a machine you have there on the table and imagine what is architecture. And then you come with interaction design. You have no experience what it means to have somebody moving in, let's say, in this space and having poles popping up 5 meters high with super machines which tracking the movement in a structure like this. You are impossible to do that. And I think there you start trying to map it to architecture, where I think just make a nice kinetic sculpture, explore it, make maybe once an installation. But I think to call this architecture and thinking that you can translate such an object into architecture, I find it actually reducing what you're working on. I find it a pity to use this idea of this would be now a building. And I think we do that since very long time. We work so long time on interaction in space with installations. And I can tell you what we experienced of how people respond in an environment, how an environment can transform. You cannot imagine how complex, how difficult it is. And then coming to a building like that, it's just like, I find it completely crazy. And I find it actually that you have made such a beautiful thing, and you should rather start building up step by step and not directly calling this architecture, because most of the people will only always see it then as architecture, and you cut away that people can actually imagine something. And that's just an advice.
Yes,
I wanted
you.
to share.
Yeah, in a certain degree, I agree. But like I said, I didn't want it to call it architecture. But the concept is transposable to the idea of architecture, I think. Some elements of, we wanted to show that having relationships with architecture and having user input towards architecture, because like Elise said, right now architecture, in the architectural field, architecture is a very static thing. An architect designs something and it stays the same. You can work with light, you can work with the way, but you don't have, buildings don't give, of architecture don't give a direct feedback in a very...
There is already quite a lot which are interactive. Let's call it architectural part. An entire building, maybe not, but there's a lot of walls which reacts to your movement, shape, and an end. Still, it is a very, very restrained, controlled environment where you can actually try to set up a relation in between the user and, let's call it the special artifact, not to say architecture. Then coming to a building directly, wow. I mean, you may know the Hyperbody Research Group. Did you ever see what is their Kinetic Pavillon? With these muscles which moves because some user is moving. Have you ever experienced that? No. I can tell you, if you see it, it's really, it makes you sad because it's cheap. It's not. It doesn't work really. It bubbles around. You have no relation to you, and they call that a super central experience. It isn't. And I think there you have a lot of questions when you directly, because you push it into always this idea of architecture. And architecture, that you have a certain vision about it, what it has a function, it has a certain meaning, and you look in architecture in a certain way. As soon as you say it's an installation and you find different modes you can experience it, I think you have more freedom and you can actually try to create all these relations step by step.
Yeah, but like I said, we didn't want it to define it as architecture. Perhaps you personally understood it to be as more like an architecture artifact, but for us it's a concept more, not like I explicitly said, this is for me not architecture, it's for me a concept, a way of dealing with kinetic movement and with user interaction with an artifact. And Yeah, I still believe, and it's also a research kind of project. Like, I really want to experience the way this pavilion is working. I don't know, perhaps it's disappointing, but I still want to try it, and I still want to see how this works on a big scale.
Small reaction. It is true that we are still students, so this is our first model, and we need to learn more and more. And as we learned a lot from this project, we will learn more from the next prototypes we will make. So our next prototype won't be directly an architecture; it will again be an installation, and then we will make different steps to come to it.
I just wanted to react as well, because I think it's a very good remark that Manuel just said, the idea to take it step by step, because it's true that from your presentation we kind of understood that you wanted to go directly from this small scale model to a gigantic pavilion that could be deployed in urban space. I think yeah, well, I think it's good to be also, I mean, when you're young, you are dreaming about stuff, and you have the energy, and it's good to have that as well. Of course, from your point of view, you have a lot of experience, and you can you can think with much more feedback and experience, and of course, maybe in a more realistic way, but I think they have a great energy, and anyway, it's not about that, but I just want to react on that, just saying, why couldn't it be an architecture in the future? Maybe not now, maybe it's not ready, maybe it needs much more time and maybe 10 years before being there. Why couldn't not, yeah, that's more a question for you. Why not an architecture?
Do you think that the building changing its shape depending on the weather is a bad thing? A bad thing. It's not usable thing. I think it's a good idea. That's why.
Let's say it's not a question about good and bad. First of all, I think, of course, there's a lot of questions many people ask how architecture can respond to its environment. And there's a lot of ideas. Kinetic take part, light can take part, and actually architecture already nowadays is much more adapting to its environment than we think. All your heating system is taking the environment, reacts to it, light gets switched on and on. There is a lot of responsive elements in architecture. So no, why not the light, the shape, and the form, of course. But here we come also on the question about interaction design, because most of the ideas which has been evoked are interactive. So just to give you an example, we have done a lot of interactive installations. We made a long kinetic wall, people walk along, the elements react to it. But seeing after 4 years experience, we've put it away, the interactivity. Because what we discovered is that the people actually, instead of looking and having also kind of calm down, seeing something, start to run. We don't manage that the people stop running around this installation, because what they do is trying to find out what is the parameter of the relation. So it becomes an experiment. And what they do is finding the limits of the system. So let's say a thing moves like this. Can I run faster? Does it move faster? At what moment it breaks? That becomes a lot of fun part. And actually what you see is that the attitude of the person is completely changing. And then you ask yourself, what was the initial idea? And then you see that how you get both things together. That's an incredible long way. And that makes actually then what is the design about? It's not as easy. Look, it is possible that I move my finger and this moves, of course. Possible it is. But does the relationship function? Does it really give something? Or does the people, what is the reaction? Because interaction design makes people behave in a certain way. But most of the time, and that is what it's our experience, is most of the time people don't look anymore. It becomes a play. And it becomes actually only amusement. And that's most of the time what you haven't imagined in the beginning. So, from my experience, yeah, we made 1 or 2 projects where I would say, Sometimes it worked, but most of the time we haven't been even able to understand the entire process which takes place. So.
I think it's a very interesting discussion here, because I think also that within 10 years, this what you have observed when you first produce your interactive installation will probably totally change. I think if you see now how kids, 2-year-old kids can interact with iPad, I know it's maybe a stupid comment, but still, I do believe that for the future generation it will become more obvious, and what we experiment now the reaction will be completely different within 10 years. I'm convinced about it. Maybe from a point of view, but maybe you will be too vintage at that time. I don't know.
Touch everything. They tear on everything, they pull on everything because, it's interactive, so I can do whatever I want. No? And it's very difficult to set the frame, to give a limit, to make the rules of the game clear. And actually, you don't want to make a game. At least we don't want to do a game. Yeah, but everybody is on this game experience, no? And it's not a very contemplative or very intellectual, very intuitive exchange.
Like we are speaking about interaction, but each one has got a different idea of interaction. This is the point. Because, for example, I was surprised when you presented your work and say you speak lower and the things do like that.
Because then we hear you better.
Sorry. Yes, sorry. I know that it's very interesting to me, this discussion right now, because we are touching a very important point, that is the interaction. So, for example, in these last 3 interventions, you speak about 2 kinds of interaction: the play, that is a kind of interaction, l'iPod, that is another one. You speak that the voices pull up the roof. So, what we are speaking about when we are speaking about interaction, this is the matter, because you say there are some rules. What is it, interaction in your opinion?
I think that most of the time we use interaction, we actually mean responsive. I scream, this thing goes up. So it reacts. My reaction to it is that I scream louder. Is that the interaction? Because if we talk about interaction, there is something, I give an input, I get an output, and I change my behavior. Otherwise, it just reacts to an input. So this is what I mean with a dialogue which is established. And most of the time, the dialogue, if you would put a roof which reacts to sound, you can be for sure that everybody would stand next to the microphone and scream until the end, because they want just to see how this thing reacts. But is this interactive? Or is interaction only to find out how the system works? And then it is a very limited idea of interaction. So most of the time I would rather talk about responsive.
Weather changing quite fastly, and you have it's interactive, but it's one of the functions of. Okay, but it's one of the functions. It's one of the functions of the. Okay, but it's one of the functions of the structure. Yeah. Okay, that's responsive. So, it's a good idea, isn't it? You have an event. You have 100 people there. It's quite warm, and so it's open. And from one moment to another, starts raining. You need to, it shapes so everybody can be in there in a comfortable way.
In the greenhouse, we now have SMA-shaped pistons. It's warm. The piston opens. It's not even with electricity. It's completely green technology. Let's call it like this. Opens automatically. It ventilates the building. Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. Still, that is a system. That's a mechanism. It's not more until there. It's a great idea. People sell that as a mechanism. Oh, okay.
actually, there is also, I think, a difference of intention of you wanting to make finally artworks, not really architecture. And when you want to make a project that is more to be developed in urban space, to who do you address? To which public? I mean, you're not in an art gallery, so you're not in an intellectual. Does architecture or whatever installation does have always to be intellectual or with having high meanings? I think I'm really much more attracted personally by intellectual interactivity or something with a real content. But I also noticed from experience that it's fine for people to have very easy, basic way of interacting with things just simply because it makes it democratic. Maybe it's not interesting for everybody or for a certain, I would say, yeah, for certain intellectual or artists, but it's also interesting for everybody, just people who have no education, for instance. If they can have this kind of possibility to interact with their environment, maybe that can bring them to think further instead of having nothing. Well, it's just a point of view, a reflection. It's open. It's just... Anyway, maybe you want to have a last word on this.
Yes. I think it's also a matter of an evolution, because I agree in the start people will try to find the limits of the system, and because it's new and because it's yeah, I understand your criticism, and I think it's because it's new for people, and in a matter of time, perhaps in 10 years or 20 years, people will be, hopefully get more used to having these feedback moments, and then they will neglect the playful part and just enjoy the experience, I believe. And I strongly believe this in architecture. And I think in your practice, it's making sculptures, I understand, and that's a whole different area, I think. And architecture is something that needs more time to grow and needs a change of people's view against this this concept.
Okay. You want to say something? Well, I propose that we close the debate here, unless there is a very necessary intervention right now. Someone who wants to scream, yeah, I want to scream with the... Okay, no. So I just invite you to have a last drink at the bar. And of course, maybe to test and try out some of the applications that have been developed. So maybe you can, I don't know, show... if someone wants to see exactly how this works, or want to try out with the Kinetic or with the iPad or whatever. Of course, this project, like I said, is going to be shown here again until the 10th of February. And for the rest, iMAL has many activities coming in February. Amongst them, we have a call for project that is closing on the 20th of February about 20th of January, sorry, so it's Friday. It's Friday, so you have to till Friday to send a project. If you want to take part in the workshop called Generator X from Code to Atom, led by Marius Watts, it's around digital fabrication and how do you make objects from code, actually, from code lines. And digital fabrication, that means that we're going to have here a couple of devices such as laser cutter, 3D printers, what else, CNC milling machine. So we are planning actually to open a fab lab here in September in the coming months. So a fab lab that can help you to fabricate something like they did. I mean, at least the digital, not the physical parts of their objects. And this is open to designer, creative people, whoever, architect. Whatever. So, of course, you're going to have much more information on that through a newsletter, but don't hesitate to come to me tonight if you have any question on that. Thank you very much. And thank you.